Just in terms of the law, could we put a load of Channel migrants on a warship and send them back to France?
Well, my concern about using a warship is that, our armed forces are being trained to kill. They're trained to defend us and to fight a foreign enemy. The migrants that are crossing, whilst there may be economic migrants, they're not the enemy of the UK. And so that's, if you look at America, they have a US Coast Guard for a reason. They separate the US Navy, which is obviously to protect against foreign enemies, and their Coast Guard. So I don't understand why this isn't a border force issue and why the border force doesn't have cutters that could, like the US does with Cuban migrants that come across to Florida, do the same thing. Because it's a policing issue, not an armed force issue.
Yeah, I suspect the argument that Lee Anderson would make, well, of course he's not here, but would be that in some weekends you can have upwards of 1,200 people crossing the Channel. And so we don't necessarily have the border force ships or the Coast Guard ships of that particular size. I do also think the point that he's making is that a warship, basically, would be a visible symbol of a deterrent. And as long as it isn't shooting at people, which, let's be honest, it's not going to, is that such a bad thing?
Well, I mean, last January, obviously, the Royal Navy was pushing back against, because this story comes up from time to time over and over again. The Navy's going to get involved, the Navy doesn't get involved. It goes back to the Home Office, it comes back to the Navy again. Then they get an agreement with France, nothing ever happens with that. And you can't really blame the French, can you? Because if we can't be bothered to, defend our shores, why should they do it for us? So, but the problem for me is that, would it not be more of a deterrent if there were dedicated Coast Guard ships patrolling the Channel 24/7 with the latest equipment? Because the government has enough money to do it. They showed that with the pandemic. They showed that with the conflict in Ukraine. The money printer goes.
I get what you're saying, and it's an important distinction, that, because the way that our Coast Guard is behaving at the minute is that they are essentially, in my view, a bit of an Uber service for Channel migrants, OK? The other point in this, not to get too bogged down in the optics of a warship, the other point really is about towing boats back to France and then having a standoff with the French. And can we do that? So forget the warships, forget anything. It's Channel migrants in some form of vessel being towed back into French waters and presumably just dropped off at the beach in Calais.
Well, I mean, obviously, that's an extreme measure for us to take, and obviously we can expect French pushback on that. I mean, really, we need to reach an agreement with France where we're not asking them to do everything. We do it all ourselves. It's in our self-interest to do that, but to have an agreement with them where they accept them back rather than just dump them at sea and just leave them to drift off into the Atlantic.